Have you ever felt despised, wronged, or even betrayed, as if no one believed in you? The story of Jephthah is proof that even the greatest challenges can be overcome. Born into a context of rejection, Jephthah was rejected by his own family, but God chose him for a great destiny. On his journey, he faced powerful enemies, made difficult choices, and dealt with profound tragedies. But his story is not just about loss, it is about faith, overcoming, and how God can transform our weaknesses into great victories. Today, we will discover how Jephthah's example can inspire you to move forward, even when everything seems lost. Before we begin, if you are passionate about incredible biblical stories and want to learn more about characters like Jephthah, subscribe to the channel now. Don't forget to activate the bell so you don't miss any new content. Let's dive into this fascinating journey together. The story of Jephthah takes place during a dark period in Israel's history, marked by disobedience and oppression. After the death of Joshua, the people turned away from God, adopting the pagan customs of the neighboring nations. They began to worship gods such as Baal and Ashtoreth, forgetting the Lord who had freed them from Egypt and given them the promised land. As a result, God allowed Israel to be handed over to their enemies. Among these oppressors were the Ammonites, a cruel people who invaded Israelite territory, plundering cities and terrorizing families. For years, the Ammonites dominated Israel, leaving the people without hope. Finally, the Israelites cried out to God for help. Although he initially rejected their request, reminding them of their constant rebellion, God could not bear to see the people suffering and decided to act. But for this, Israel needed a strong and courageous leader who could face them and bring deliverance. It was in this scenario of crisis and despair that Jephthah emerged as an unlikely figure, but chosen by God to change history. Jephthah did not have a background that anyone would consider worthy of a hero. He was born in Gilead, a mountainous region of Israel, but his story began with a heavy burden. He was the son of Gilead and a prostitute. This fact made him an outsider within his own family. Jephthah's father, Gilead, also had other sons with his legitimate wife. These brothers, as they grew up, did not want to share their inheritance with Jephthah. In their eyes, he was not worthy of being called part of the family. When the time came to decide what would happen next, Jephthah's brothers made a cruel decision. They threw him out of their home. "You will not share in our family inheritance," they said. Jephthah, left with no choice, was forced to leave everything behind, his home, his land, and the little security he still had. He set out for Tob, a distant land, isolated and rejected. In Tob, Jephthah began a new life, but not exactly the way he had dreamed. He gradually became the leader of a group of marginalized men. These were individuals who, like him, had no place in society. Although they were called stray men in the Bible, they were actually rough, hardened warriors. Jephthah earned their respect for his strength, courage, and natural leadership skills. Although rejected by his family and despised for his background, Jephthah did not let this define him completely. He was not just a fugitive, he was a man who knew how to fight. Little did he know that God was preparing this moment for something much greater. Jephthah did not yet understand it, but his humble background, his rejection, and even his association with rough men in Tob were shaping the leader Israel would soon need. The story of Jephthah reminds us that God can use unlikely people and difficult situations to accomplish his plans. Jephthah, the rejected son of Gilead, was being prepared, without even knowing it, for a role that would change the destiny of Israel. The days were dark in Gilead. The Ammonites, Israel's enemies, were imposing their rule with violence and cruelty. They not only invaded the lands of Israel, but also plundered villages, destroyed crops, and enslaved entire families. The people of Israel lived in constant fear, unable to resist the relentless force of their enemy. The origins of the conflict went back to ancient territorial disputes. The Ammonites claimed that Israel had taken their lands unjustly during the conquest led by Moses centuries earlier. They demanded the return of a vast region that included territories east of the Jordan River. But Israel knew that these lands had been conquered legitimately, with God's guidance, when they faced the Amorites. It was not a question of return, but of invasion. With the advance of the Ammonites, the situation became untenable. The tribes of Israel, especially those in the east, were cornered. Gilead, being one of the hardest-hit regions, faced near-total destruction. The people, without a strong leader or an organized army, could only cry out for help. But the question that rang out was, who would be brave enough to face this fierce enemy? The elders of Gilead, the leaders of the region, gathered in desperation. They knew they needed someone with courage, military skill, and leadership to fight the Ammonites. But there was no one among them who was up to the challenge. The situation seemed hopeless. In this crisis scenario, an unlikely idea emerged: seek help from Jephthah, the man they had rejected and cast out years ago. He had the battle experience they needed, leading rough, hardened men. Plus, his reputation as a tough warrior and strategist had spread far and wide. Even so, going to Jephthah was a difficult decision for the elders. How could they ask for help from someone they had treated so badly in the past? But need was greater than pride. The fate of Gilead and perhaps all of Israel depended on this choice. Finally, the elders decided they had no choice but to swallow their pride and seek out Jephthah, even though it would require a great deal of negotiation. Thus, the stage was set for the return of Jephthah, a rejected man who, against all odds, would be called to lead the people who had abandoned him. But questions still lingered: would he accept this request? And if he did, would he be able to free Israel from the brutal oppression of the Ammonites? The decisions that followed would be crucial not only for Gilead, but for the entire nation of Israel. What do you think of the Gilead elders' decision to seek help from Jephthah, a man they had once rejected? Do you believe that in times of crisis, we should set aside our pride and seek help where we least expect it? Share your thoughts in the comments. Let's reflect together on how the choices made by Jephthah and the elders can teach us about forgiveness, courage, and leadership in difficult times. When Jephthah was called upon by the elders of Gilead to lead the fight against the Ammonites, he did not begin with swords and shields. Before going into battle, Jephthah used a surprising approach: diplomacy. This shows that he was not only a warrior, but also a wise man who understood the value of words before weapons. As soon as he assumed leadership, Jephthah sent messengers to the king of the Ammonites with a direct question: "Why have you come to fight against us? What have we done to provoke this?" It was a simple question, but it was loaded with intent. Jephthah wanted to clarify the reasons for the conflict and, if possible, avoid a war. The king of the Ammonites responded quickly, claiming that Israel had stolen his land when they left Egypt centuries earlier. He demanded the return of the land, including the regions of Arnon, Jabbok, and Jordan, in order to make peace. It was an old demand, but it was full of distortions. Jephthah then demonstrated his skill as a true negotiator and expert in the history of his people. In his response, he detailed how the Israelites had never stolen the land. He explained that during the journey from Egypt to the Promised Land, Israel had asked for peaceful passage through several nations, including Edom and Moab, but had been rejected by all. When they reached the land of the Amorites, King Sihon attacked them, and it was only after this aggression that Israel fought back and conquered the lands that were now under dispute. Furthermore, Jephthah reminded the king of the Ammonites that the land had been given to Israel by God himself. The Lord, the God of Israel, gave this land to his people. Why do you think you can take it back? He also pointed out that in 300 years of coexistence, the Ammonites had never claimed the lands before. Why were they only now interested in them? Jephthah's response was clear, logical, and respectful, yet firm. He showed that he understood not only the history, but also God's role as the true sovereign of Israel and all nations. It was an argument that both vindicated Israel's position and challenged the legitimacy of the Ammonites' claims. But the king of the Ammonites would not listen. Despite the clarity and force of Jephthah's arguments, he rejected the peace proposal and insisted on war. This refusal made it clear that the conflict was not just territorial but also a challenge to the God of Israel. Jephthah the diplomat had done everything in his power to avoid bloodshed. His attempt to resolve the issue peacefully showed his character and wisdom. But now, with the Ammonites' rejection, he knew that battle was inevitable. More than a dispute over land, it would be a confrontation between the God of Israel and the gods of the Ammonites. Jephthah was ready to fight, knowing that he had done everything he could to seek peace before war. With diplomacy rejected by the king of the Ammonites, Jephthah knew there was no way to avoid confrontation. Battle was inevitable, and he needed to prepare the people of Gilead to face a powerful enemy. But Jephthah was no ordinary leader. Before making any military move, he did what he knew was essential: seek God's direction. First, Jephthah rallied the men of Gilead, summoning warriors from all over the region. Many of these men were farmers, shepherds, or simple laborers with no military experience. Yet they answered the call with courage, knowing that this was a fight for the survival of their families and their land. Jephthah, with his experience leading hardened men, knew how to inspire them and organize them into an army. As he prepared his forces, Jephthah also prepared himself spiritually. He understood that victory would depend not just on strategy or strength, but on God's favor. So, in a moment of deep surrender, he made a vow to the Lord. With all sincerity and urgency, Jephthah promised, "If you will deliver the Ammonites into my hands, then whatever comes out of the doors of my house to meet me when I return in peace will be the Lord's. I will sacrifice it as a burnt offering." This vow, as intense as it was desperate, showed Jephthah's complete trust in God, but it also reflected the overwhelming pressure he felt as a leader. He wanted to ensure that he was not just relying on his own strength but was placing the entire situation in the Lord's hands. After this, Jephthah began to plot his strategy. He studied the enemy's movements, assessed the terrain, and deployed his troops wisely. This was no easy battle. The Ammonites had an organized army and were known for their ferocity. But Jephthah knew how to use the limited forces he had wisely. He prepared ambushes, studied the enemy's weak points, and kept his men motivated with speeches that recalled the great victories God had given Israel in the past. As the day of battle approached, the atmosphere was tense. On each face was a mixture of fear and hope. Jephthah, on the other hand, maintained the posture of a leader who trusted the Lord completely. He knew that this would not be just a war against the Ammonites, but a demonstration of God's power to defend his people. With his warriors ready and his heart aligned with the Lord, Jephthah led his army toward the battlefield. He was about to face not only a deadly enemy, but also the weight of his own vow and the responsibility of protecting the land God had given to Israel. The preparation was over, and Israel's fate would be decided in the coming confrontation. The day of battle finally arrived. Jephthah, with his army of Gilead, would face the Ammonites in a decisive fight. He knew that victory depended on God's help, and before he began, he prayed for guidance and protection. With his heart turned to the Lord, he gave the command to advance. The fighting was intense. The Ammonites were well armed and numerically superior, but Jephthah's army trusted in God. Throughout the battle, Israel prevailed, and the hand of God seemed to guide their every move. The Ammonites began to retreat as the battle progressed, and soon victory became clear. The pursuit was relentless. The Israelites gave no respite to their fleeing enemies, ensuring that the Ammonites' defeat was complete. In the end, Jephthah's army had won, freeing the region of Gilead from oppression. It was a remarkable victory, not only because of Jephthah's military power, but because of the direct intervention of God, who had given them the strength and wisdom to face the Ammonites. Jephthah not only won a war, but also solidified his role as leader of Israel, showing that with faith and obedience to God, no battle is impossible to win. If you are enjoying this journey through Jephthah's story, don't forget to leave a like. Your support makes all the difference and helps us bring you more inspiring content like this. Let's continue this reflection together. After his crushing victory over the Ammonites, Jephthah returned triumphantly to his home in Mizpah, accompanied by the warriors of Gilead. They were exhausted but filled with joy, for they had defeated a relentless enemy and secured peace for the land. It was a time of celebration, a time when Jephthah could finally rest and enjoy the fruits of his leadership. But there was something weighing on Jephthah's heart, something he could not forget. Before the battle, he had made a solemn vow to the Lord, promising that if he were victorious, the first thing that came out of his house to meet him would be offered to God as a burnt offering. It was a desperate vow, a promise born of deep faith but also of anxiety, for Jephthah feared defeat. As soon as Jephthah arrived home, his eyes were fixed on the moment when he would fulfill his vow. He knew that he had to be true to his word, for his commitment to God could not be broken. As he approached his home, something unexpected happened. From inside the house came his daughter, his only daughter, dancing and celebrating her father's victorious return. She was joyful, full of life, unaware that her arrival at the door would be the fulfillment of a tragic destiny. Jephthah looked at her, and for a moment, all was silent. He saw the smile on her face, but immediately remembered the vow he had made to God. Pain and sadness filled his heart, for he knew that as a leader and a man of faith, he could not break his promise. He said in a voice full of despair, "Woe is me, daughter! You have brought me great distress. I have made a vow to the Lord, and I cannot go back on it." His daughter, without hesitation, responded wisely and calmly, demonstrating a faith that perhaps even surprised Jephthah himself. "Father, you have made a vow to the Lord. If this is what you have promised, then do according to your heart. Just give me a little time to go to the mountains and mourn my loss, for I am young and have no hope of marriage." She knew her life would be sacrificed, but her response was full of acceptance, showing the importance of obedience to God, even in the face of personal tragedy. Heartbroken, Jephthah allowed his daughter to go mourn with her friends for 2 months. She and her companions retreated to the mountains, where they mourned the loss of their future, their marriage, and their lives. At the end of the 2 months, she returned, and Jephthah fulfilled his vow. Jephthah's daughter was sacrificed, fulfilling the promise he had made to God. This tragedy left a deep mark on Jephthah's story. Although he won the battle and was recognized as a hero, he carried the pain of his vow throughout his life. The story of Jephthah and the sacrifice of his daughter is a reminder of the seriousness of vows made to God and the importance of considering the consequences of our words and promises. It is a story of faith and obedience, but also of sadness and sacrifice. Jephthah's lesson teaches us that when we make promises to God, we must be aware that He expects faithfulness, and that faithfulness may require more than we imagine. Jephthah's legacy extends beyond his military victories. He is remembered for his courage and faith in God, which helped him lead Israel against the Ammonites and overcome internal challenges. But his story also reveals important lessons. As leader of Gilead, Jephthah trusted God fully to defeat the Ammonites, and his victory became a significant milestone for Israel. However, his pre-battle vow to sacrifice the first creature that left his home resulted in personal tragedy when his daughter was the first to greet him after his victory. This sacrifice, though made in obedience to a vow, became an example of the dangers of impulsive promises made without considering the consequences. The conflict with the tribe of Ephraim also marked Jephthah's legacy, highlighting the dangers of pride and lack of unity among the tribes of Israel. Even after a great victory, the nation became divided, and civil war between brothers revealed that Israel's unity was fragile. Thus, Jephthah's legacy is a mix of achievement and tragedy. He teaches us the importance of trusting in God, but also of carefully reflecting on our promises and decisions. His example reminds us that, even in victories, pride and lack of humility can have difficult consequences. Jephthah is a leader who, despite his mistakes, always sought to do what he thought was right, leaving a legacy that speaks of faith, responsibility, and the complexities of leadership. Now that you know Jephthah's story, we want to know what you think. What has impacted you most on this journey of overcoming and leadership? How do you view the difficult choices he made? Leave a comment below and share your thoughts with us. We would love to hear your opinion. And so, we come to the end of Jephthah's story. He went through moments of rejection, made difficult choices, and faced battles, but he never stopped trusting in God. His story teaches us that no matter how hard life is and how complicated it takes us, we can always find strength in our faith and the decisions we make. Jephthah showed that even when the world seems to turn its back on us, we can be used by God in extraordinary ways. So, remember, in your own challenges, just like Jephthah, you too can make a difference. If you were inspired by Jephthah's story and want to continue following more powerful stories like this one, don't forget to subscribe to the channel. Turn on the bell so you don't miss any new videos and stay up to date with everything we have prepared for you. Let's continue together on this journey of learning and inspiration. See you later.